Jesi milostivi čovekoljubi Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems, giants walking, angels and demons fight, only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold, mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold. From valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to mysteries and majesty. Study with us, and don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy, and horror. Dungeons and dragons, Skyrim and Mordor. The powers haunt the evening in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in their towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep of the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Mysteries and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
Blessed Sunday, everyone. I'm very pleased to continue this early chapter, third chapter of the Ministry Podcast with another VIP guest. Namely, tonight I have the honor to welcome for the first time ever on the podcast, Joseph Jordan, who is a skilled UFO and paranormal researcher, our brother in Christ, who have been releasing books and material when it comes to the UFO deception, and just trying to help people out there when it comes to learning who these little so-called gray and green entities out there are. And when it comes to the many attacks and sleeping paralysis that people throughout the world have been experiencing and looking for help. So, Joseph, thank you so much for coming and finding time for myself and the audience. Can we please start by you introducing yourself? I know that you have an amazing job that I feel jealous about. And then you can continue by telling us, how did this even started when it comes to alien abductions?
Oh, we'll get to that in a minute. That's a long story. First of all, thank you for having me on this show. And I got to tell you, that lead in, that's a hard one to follow. I have done a lot of shows in my time, and that is one awesome lead into your show. Congrats on that. Okay, about me. By profession, I'm a environmental health and safety professional for one of America's leading space program competitors right now, down in Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And I'm living my dream job, I got to tell you. People say, aren't you retired by now? And I said, I wouldn't give this up for anything. I'm going to try and stay with it as long as I can. I am living my dream in rockets. But what I do here to be on this show is something completely different. This is something I've been doing for close to 33 years now, is investigation into UFOs and the alien abduction phenomenon. And it started accidentally, my getting into this field. It wasn't something I was interested in at all. I didn't pay any attention to any talk about UFOs. at that time when I first got into this. This was 1992. And it happened to be on a vacation trip that got me started in this. I was headed to Anchorage, Alaska from Florida, flying out of Orlando. And I was going to visit my brother on vacation, some vacation time I had. He was up in Anchorage in the Air Force, and I'd never been to, Alaska, and I hadn't seen him in a few years. So I decided to take the vacation trip and go see him. And I also took along my mom and my young son at the time, who was 6. And I thought it'd be good for him to see his 2 cousins up there too. So we made the trip. And as we were flying out of Orlando, I thought, well, I better get something to pass the time on the plane, because this is going to be 10.5 hours of flying time to Anchorage from Orlando, Florida. We didn't have all the electronics that most people are, familiar with and used to using like we have nowadays. Back then, you needed a magazine or a book to pass the time on a plane, unless you were going overseas, and then they had movies. So I went through the kiosk there in Orlando looking for something to pass the time on the plane. Went through the magazines, didn't find anything that interested me, and moved over to the paperback section that they had. And I was looking for something science fiction. I wanted something that I was familiar with, and science fiction was something I was very familiar with. I grew up an Army brat living overseas most of my life, and living in foreign countries. I didn't get a chance to watch TV like most Americans did growing up, because the TVs were in another language that I couldn't understand. So we opted for reading material instead to pass the time as kids being overseas, whether it be comic books or fiction books or, something like that. And my genre was science fiction. I love science fiction. To me, science fiction was the greatest form of escapism, especially for a young person that, was dealing with daily things and, tasks of the day and just daily life as we were growing up. You know how kids could be. Nowadays, they got other forms of escapism, some not so good, but back then I had science fiction. And I knew that if I picked up a science fiction book in just a matter of minutes, I could be in my space where I could be in a far, far world on the other side of the galaxy with other beings. It's that escapism from reality. For that short time that I'm reading that science fiction book, I'm someplace different. I'm some time different. And that goes with any fiction, whether, you're reading historical fiction where you're back in the 1800s or Western days or something like that. You can actually put yourself there. But we understand that that's only in our mind. It's only an escapism period of time that we're doing this. And then we come back to reality. The one thing I learned is the definite line that separates that fiction from reality. I understood where that line was. I understood that line was absolutely black and solid. And you knew when you were in escape mode, and you knew you were in reality mode. So I'm going through this kiosk looking for a book to pick up, and I find one, and the front cover looks like a science fiction book. It read like a science fiction book to me. But when I turned over and looked at the back of it, it said it was not a fiction book. It was a scientific study, research on an event that happened in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947, something about a crash disk flash saucer. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, no. This is fiction. It's got to be fiction. Aliens aren't real. Aliens are science fiction. So what's the deal here with this book? That book, by the way, was UFO Crash at Roswell. And still got it. And it's what brought me into this subject matter. Not because of the interest of UFOs and flying saucers or aliens. The interest was, how did they blur that solid black line that separates reality from fiction? That's what caught my attention to even look at this phenomenon at all, because it happened to be with a story on this phenomenon. So I bought the book, started reading it on the plane, on my downtime that I had while I was in Alaska for a week. I kept reading it and finished it quickly once I got home. All that did was open up a can of worms of questions for me, because I wasn't familiar with this subject. I thought it was just hokey to begin with. I thought, these people are deceived or whatever, because, this is not real. This has got to be fiction. So looking at this and these people throwing so much out there at me, once I started asking questions about saying that this is a reality, that got my interest. Okay, I said, I've got to get to the root of this and find out what's going on. So I reached out to help. I'm looking for somebody to help me get answers to what all this was about. Came across a gentleman who had a small business in Orlando, and he was a state section director for the Mutual UFO Network. Mutual UFO Network is the largest grassroots organization, nonprofit, not-for-profit, public, open for anybody to be able to join and become participating in, UFO investigative organization that's been around since 1969. It's the last of the big ones that were around, and it's they're doing well. They got thousands and thousands of members worldwide. It's the structure of it is fantastic. It has many, many, many PhD consultants in different fields of study that, as a member, I can reach out to if I have questions, on a case that I'm working on. It gives the average person an opportunity, like myself, to be able to become a member, become a field investigator, and to be able to follow up on sighting investigation and reports for MUFON. MUFON's intent is to find the answers to this phenomenon for the benefit of humanity, and whatever that benefit may be. They've got hundreds of thousands of cases that they've that they put in their database since 1969, and they're not the only ones. There's other organizations that are out there too. The National Reporting Center is another one. They have lots of cases too. Luckily, they do talk to each other. So that was my first idea, was to get involved with MUFON to be able to get the assistance I needed to try to find answers to what this was all about. Keep in mind that at this time in my life, when I first got into this field, looking at it for the first time, I was looking at it through the eyes, the lenses of an agnostic humanist, which is what I was at the time. Thank you for public schooling that made me that way. Just kidding. But it's not that I wasn't familiar with the church and the Bible. I was very familiar. I told you I grew up an Army brat overseas, and my parents were devout Protestant followers of Jesus Christ. And we used to hit all of the churches on the bases that were there, wherever we were stationed at. We went to the church that was located on the base. So I grew up in the church. I just never accepted it for its reality. By the time I got to be a senior, the world was beating me up, and pressures and everything else from being a teenager and all of that. And I ended up walking away from the church entirely and became what you call an agnostic humanist. But I still had that background, that still upbringing of what the church was about. And that would come into play later in my research. So as I got involved with MUFON, I had an opportunity with them to actually start my own chapter in the county that I live in, Brevard County, Florida, which is where the Kennedy Space Center is located. The Orlando area, with big metropolitan area, they had a chapter for MUFON already organized. And the guy that was director in the Orlando chapter, he said, "Hey, it looks like you have a very strong interest in this. It looks like you want to really pursue these questions and find answers. Why don't you consider putting together your own chapter over in your county?" And he helped me put that together, and I did. And eventually I became the state section director for Brevard County, Florida. And I would be holding my own chapter meetings for the public, which is one of the requirements for being a state section director. they want you to hold public meetings, usually once a month, and find a neutral territory to hold it in. It's something we don't charge for. The idea was to be able to get information out to the public about MUFON. It also worked as a membership drive opportunity, but it also gave us an opportunity to see what was going on in the county that we had our chapter in, as far as people who had had experiences and they wanted to report things and talk about things that they had experienced in their lifetime in our county. So first thing I needed to do was set up a place of meeting, and I used our local library. They said that, yeah, we can set you up with a room, all the seating, all the audio-visual stuff you need to put on presentations, and it's all free as long as you don't charge for for people coming in here. And I said, no, plan on doing it for free. So here we go. We're getting things started. I actually had 5 guys that in the very beginning there that were interested in being field investigators. And I worked with training them up to become field investigators like I was too. And we were off and ready to be able to take sighting reports and start doing our own investigations for our county. As far as the meetings go, when it was time to do our first meeting, we were kind of nervous. We hadn't done this before. And I made up a 8x10 piece of paper and kind of a crude looking sign to put on the door. It said, UFO meeting, public welcome, free of charge. Now think about that. If you put a sign like that on a door, what kind of people you figure are going to show up? Besides the ones like me and you. Oh, like the people that are watching this show. Yeah, same type of people. Regular people, just everyday people. It's just that most of them had something incredible, supernatural, strange, whatever you want to call it, exciting to some of them, happen to them. And it was something that was common to all the people coming to the meeting. And that's what made the meeting so absolutely interesting, was the people themselves, not us putting the meeting on. Because most of the people had a story to tell that came to our meetings. Very few were there just to see what was happening. Some just curious. They'd come and they'd check it out and then they'd leave. But most people that were coming were people that had either had a sighting at some time in their life they couldn't explain. They wanted to share, because back then in '92, it was very hard to talk about a lot of this stuff. People would ridicule you for being into it. Not as much anymore. It's coming around to where we can talk more about it freely and not get ridiculed, and actually get a good discussion going now compared to back then. But the meetings were doing good. And as we pursued, went forward with the meetings, we were giving people updates on what we were working on and what MUFON was working on as a whole. And then we'd take stories and testimonies from the people that were coming to the meetings to learn more about them and try to understand the different types of things that were being seen in our county, especially around the Kennedy Space Center, which I didn't think we would be seeing anything around there as far as reports, because of the strict controlled airspace there because of the space program. But yeah, people were seeing things even with all of that. So as we went through the meetings and went through our regular process with MUFON, we did follow up on the number of sighting investigations that came in locally. And we continued to work with a lot of the people that were coming to the meetings with their testimonials of events that they had experienced. And then I started to listen to some of the people talking there at the meeting. I didn't understand at first what they were talking about. And finally, I had to cut in on them and say, hey, can I be part of this conversation? I'd like to know what's affecting you here. And they started sharing a little bit about what they had experienced. And what they were referring to was something called alien abduction. Well, I hadn't been involved with anything to do with alien abductions. At the time, back in the early 90s, MUFON wasn't even set up to look at the alien abduction experience. They had one gentleman that was working with them that was able to do some work with it, but there was no structure to investigating it at the time. There were no questionnaire to send out. There was none of that. So when I first came across the abduction experiencers and listening to their stories, I wasn't quite sure what I could do with that. But the more I listened to them, the more I understood that this was of extreme importance in this phenomenon. Because it's one thing to chase lights in the sky after the fact doing an investigation report. It's a whole nother thing to be able to sit there face to face and talk to somebody that's actually been in contact with these entities that are supposedly operating the crafts in the sky. In other words, the way I saw this is if we were going to get answers to this phenomenon, it was going to be coming from the abduction realm because they were front line to this phenomenon, not just experiencers of a sighting, but people that had actually experienced the entities themselves. And I thought, if we're going to get to answers on this, I think the answers are going to come from them. They're going to be the one that give us the true nature of this phenomenon. And I wanted to change my focus there. So I talked to my my investigators that were working with me in our group. And I explained this to them, my perspective on this. And I said, I really think that the answers are going to come from them. And I think we should focus more of our work there. And they agreed. So we made a plan. And the plan was to study as much information that was currently available in the mid-90s from the other leading researchers like Bud Hopkins and John Mack and some of the other ones out there that were working with abductees, and try to prepare ourselves to work with them one-on-one, but not cause any more damage to these people, because these people had had their lives turned upside down by this experience. They were very unhappy people because they had had something done to them that changed their view of reality. And they didn't know how to handle that. They couldn't talk about it. They couldn't talk about it to their family. They couldn't talk about it to their friends. These people were just, pushed aside, saying, we can't deal with that. I don't know what's wrong with you, but I don't want to talk about that. That's kind of the response that they were getting. So they were glad to be at these meetings. And I said, we've got to listen to these people, but we've got to be able to do it without harming them. So that was what our first step was to educate ourselves as much as possible on the literature that was out there and the findings that were out there from the leading researchers. Once we did that, I said, all right, we comfortable? Let's go. And what we wanted to do was starting to interview the abduction experiencers one-on-one and record them and look for these same things that everybody else was looking for, but hopefully something else would come up that would give us that key piece of information that would open this whole thing up to what it really is. So we were kind of, taking a shot in the dark that we would find something different than those leading researchers that were there at the time. And persistence paid off. As I continued working with the abduction experiencers, I started hearing little bits and pieces of something that they were talking about amongst themselves that wasn't privy to yet. And I finally, overhearing a couple times things I didn't understand, I finally asked them, I said, what are you guys talking about? What is there something here I'm missing as far as working with you in these cases? And then finally they opened up and they said that, first and foremost, we'd love to make this experience go away. They wanted it to stop. These people were not happy with what had happened to them, and they had no control of when it happened. Most of the time with abduction experiencers, it becomes a life pattern of being taken until you find a way to make it stop completely. So that's what we were dealing with these people, is they were terrified of when the next event would be and what would happen during those events. They wanted this to stop. And they were looking in different areas for help. And back then, about the only place you could find help was from clinical psychology, which they would probably put you in a group setting, with people of like mind and like experience. But what does that do for you? That just lets you know that you're not alone in this, but that doesn't stop the experience. They may make you feel like you're not singled out, you're not some, one person dealing with this all by yourself, but that doesn't fix the problem, And I really felt for these people because they were so serious about trying to get a life back, And finally, I understood that they had come across people that were offering different types of help, they thought. And they were getting sucked in by these people and their ideas on trying to help them. And basically, they were getting their money taken for something that wasn't working. But at least there was somebody out there that was, well, I don't know if it's better, but there was somebody out there trying to help them, whether it was the right way or not. But at least there was somebody. And that somebody was the New Age metaphysical realm, which I had no clue what that was at the time. Remember, I'm an agnostic humanist. I'm looking at this from a scientific perspective. And I'm the guy from Missouri that says, you got to show me. And so far, nobody was showing me anything. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence for something happening, but there's no evidence at all for anything that shows this is extraterrestrial. There still isn't, but there definitely wasn't back then, 30 years ago. And as I'm continuing to work with these people, I had to look into this idea that they were asking for help. Who were these people that were offering this help, this New Age metaphysical realm? I had to investigate it because if I'm going to be honest about what I'm trying to understand here, I've got to look at all the pieces of the puzzle. And this happened to be one of the pieces that was affecting these people. It was pulling them to want to go to the New Age for help. And I needed to find out what was this New Age all about that was seductive to them, as far as help. So I decided to take that step in and get involved with people of the New Age community to try and understand it. Probably wasn't a good thing to do at the time, but it paid off later. I had no idea what the New Age metaphysical realm was about. So by stepping into it, I figured I would gain a little knowledge about it, little understanding, and maybe could help these people in whether they were going in the right direction, looking for help in this area. What happened was I didn't realize at the time that I was missing something in my life. And I had a hole that I didn't know that needed filling. And that hole was a spiritual hole. I had no spirit in my life as an agnostic humanist. I knew I was missing something, but I couldn't put my finger on it. As I started working with the New Age community, they seemed to be offering something to fill that hole. They were offering a type of spirituality that a lot of these abduction experiencers had gotten hooked into, also looking for help. This spirituality that they were offering made you feel good. Was it real? I don't know. It was a spirituality without accountability. That's what the New Age metaphysical realm offers. A type of spirituality with absolutely no accountability. Every experience is about the growth of your essence, your soul, or whatever it is. So experience everything you can, before you reincarnate to the next level. Yeah, very strange stuff. I spent 4 years in that realm. At the same time, still doing my research into abductions and UFOs, but looking at it from a different perspective than when I started. Now I'm looking at this realm through the lenses of the New Age metaphysical perspective. So I've had the opportunity now, at this point in my studies, to look at this UFO paranormal phenomenon through two distinct perspectives. Most researchers never have that opportunity. They usually look at it through the one perspective that they started into this field with. And it's welcomed, MUFON especially, I'll talk about that. MUFON is open to anybody, any faith, any nationality. It's open for anybody to come in and become an investigator with them. The idea behind that is we all bring a different perspective to the research. We all have a little bit different direction that we look at this from. But like I said, most people just come with the one. So now I've had two. So spending 4 years into this, wasn't learning anything new, still finding the same unanswered questions that the leading researchers were finding in the abduction realm. But we were going to be persistent, and hopefully we would find something that would change things. Well, come 1996, fall of 96, things started to change again for me. And 96 was a busy year for us. It was a busy year at the place I worked a lot of overtime. I was busy with the UFO group and the chapter we had, investigations. I had a couple interesting abduction cases I was working on. It were very different, very dark in nature, I'd have to say. And all of this at the same time that we were putting on I have to try to describe it the best way I can, a rally, a public rally at the Kennedy Space Center. And that was a big event for our group because we put a lot of work into that. And it was a demonstration at the entrance to the Kennedy Space Center back in November of 96. And what we were demonstrating for is for NASA to take pictures of the old face on Mars that were last taken at that time in 76 by the Viking missions. And we were working with Richard Hoagland at the time. And Richard Hoagland had written the book, The Monuments of Mars, which was all about the Cydonia area and the face on Mars and all of that. Well, here, finally, 20 years later, NASA's finally got another satellite going up to circle Mars and take pictures again for future landers, like the ones we have there now. And they had better camera, better satellite, and they were getting ready to do a launch. But Hoagland had found out that the area of Cydonia and the face on Mars was not going to be rephotographed. And he said, you're missing something really big. So between our group at Kennedy Space Center and another group that he knew out at Jet Propulsion Laboratories, we put together a simultaneous public demonstration in front of both locations, demanding that NASA put the plane of Cydonia and the face of Mars on the filming docket of that satellite going up. And you know what? We pulled it off because we got notified. Richard came down and notified us that NASA confirmed that they were going to add Cydonia and the face on Mars to the filming docket before it launched. And the rocket launched. We got our pictures back, new pictures, 20 years later after Viking. And not everybody was pleased, but we got what we asked for. So that was a busy time of the year. Very, very, very busy. And I was exhausted. And I had one of our investigators working with me at the time, female. And we were dating. I wasn't married. She wasn't married. And we were dating at the time, but doing the work together, research work together. And I was glad to have her because doing the interviews with abduction experiencers, who are primarily women, can get very sensitive if you're doing one-on-one interviews. And I tried not to do it one-on-one unless I absolutely had to, because they can get very sensitive in nature, the stories that they're telling, experience that they're telling, very sexual in nature a lot of times. And just to play it safe, you want to make sure you got a woman there with you, or like I was doing, let her do the interview and then just fill us in. So it worked out pretty good. But the thing is, as us being a couple, very different relationship we had. Keep in mind, I was a crystal rolling New Ager at that time, and she was a professing Christian. And we weren't sure how that was going to work. But we figured it out. We said, we won't talk about politics and we won't talk about religion, and we'll get along just fine, which we did. Until one day, right after the rally, the weekend right after the rally in November 96. I was at her place on Saturday, and she says, I'm real concerned about you. I can tell you're exhausted. I can tell you these couple cases that you're working on are very dark in nature, and I'm worried about your safety. And I said, you don't have to worry about me, my safety. I've got a whole pocket full of safety. And I pulled out my gemstones, and I was showing her the different ones that took care of different things. And she goes, yeah, I get it, but I really think I'd like to offer you a better protection than all that. And I said, well, what do you got? I was always interested in something new. And she reaches over and grabs a Bible off the table and goes to hand it to me. And I said, we talked about this. I don't think that's got anything to do with this phenomenon anyway. She goes, I think it does. And I'd just like to get your ear on this for a moment. And I said, no, we talked about that. We're not going to mix the two. And she finally says, well, you tell everybody you're the most open-minded, objective researcher out there, don't you? And I said, I do. She goes, oh, then you'll look at this? Well, I knew better. I better look at what she's got. I did. She shared with me the gospel message in a few minutes that changed me in an instant. I'd heard the gospel message many times growing up when I was younger. Remember, I said I was going to church with my parents when I was younger overseas. I never accepted it, but I knew the gospel message. I knew what it was saying. And when she shared that message with me, that few moments, it took the blinders off my eyes, the earplugs out of my ears, and I saw it in a way that I never saw it before. And I told her, I said, I want that protection. And she says, you can have that protection. Here's how. I gave my life to Jesus Christ that day in her living room, 1996, November 96. And I became a Christian. So what am I now? What's a Christian? This is new to me. I wanted to learn more. But I still planned on being a UFO investigator. So as a UFO investigator who's now a Christian, now I have a different perspective to look at this phenomenon yet once again. So not just two perspectives have I had the opportunity, but from here on, 96, as becoming a believer, all my viewpoint from this research would be gleaned from using the litmus paper of God's holy word, the Bible. And now I'm looking at this through that third perspective of God's word. Not looking at God's word through UFO lenses, but looking at God's word as what he says it says. And I wanted to know right away what it was to be a Christian. I wanted to know as much about to being a Christian and about Christianity as I could. And I wanted to know right away. I'm an inquisitive type of guy. It's the way I am. I come across something that interests me, I go after it, like I was doing with this phenomenon. So I wanted to know about Christianity the same way, the same fervor. And I had that opportunity with my lead investigator working with me. He worked out at Kennedy Space Center on a shuttle program. He was quality control. He was a Christian also, and investigating this stuff with me all along. Never thought an issue about it. And he said, hey, I've got a friend who's got this Bible study course that you might be interested in. And he said, it's 14 It can be done in 14 days. It's 14 VHS tapes, 2 hours long. We could do one a night, and then, in 2 weeks, you could be through this very intense Bible study course. And I said, man, it sounds great. And it just so happens the job I was working at the time, we had what they call plant shutdown for 2 weeks at Christmas time and New Year's. The whole plant would shut down, and it would give facilities and maintenance guys a chance to catch up and redo the facility, so we keep right on going. So I said, hey, I'm off those 2 weeks. Why don't we do those during that time? And they said, great, we'll do it at his house. I'll set it up. So we were all set up to go through this Bible study course for 2 weeks around Christmas and New Year's. And we were going to do it at his friend's house. So we went there, sat in his living room, he'd pop a VHS tape in, and away we go. These were great, intense Bible studies, and I was glad to have been able to go through them when I did. It brought me up real fast. I mean, I felt like I learned as much in 2 weeks as I could have learned in 50 Sundays of sitting in church. So I was glad to have had that opportunity. Well, about the third night that I was there, they popped in the tape, and it started up, and the same pastor that had been given the lessons, he comes on and he goes, today we're going to talk about spiritual warfare. And I looked at my partner and his friend, and I said, oh, this is going to be good. I don't know what spiritual warfare is, but it sounds cool. And I sat back ready to take this one in. And he starts out with a scripture. He starts out by quoting Ephesians 6:12. And it goes, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against spiritual wickedness in heavenly realms. And I don't know if I got it all right, but as he was saying that, as he started it, a vision of an alien gray is right there in front of my face. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, what is this? I could see my partner and his friend out of the corners of my eye. I could see and hear the TV, but this image was right there in front of me, blocking my view of the TV completely. And I'm looking, I go, what is this? And as he got to the end of the scripture, the gray alien had morphed into the most horrific thing I had ever seen. And I said to my guys, stop that video. I got to tell you what I just saw. And I explained to them, and I said, I think I was just shown what we've been dealing with all this time. And I said, I never thought of it this way. I don't know what this means. I don't know what to make of this. But if it's real, this is a game changer. And I thought, what do I do with this? So I talked to my partner and after this, and I said, you know what? If this is real, as Christians, we probably shouldn't be involved in it. And we talked about it a bit, and we all agreed that I was probably right. That if this is seeming to be demonic, then this is definitely not something that Christians should be working around. So I told him, I said, I would rather learn more about being a Christian than I would about finding answers to this UFO stuff. Because I think we got the answer. I just don't have the evidence for that answer yet. But the Bible seems to be telling me that this is what this is. And I said, I'm going to put it away. And if you're with me, join me. We agreed to slowly close out the UFO group and to focus on studying Christianity. Well, that didn't last long. About 2 weeks went by, and I get this small, still voice. And it says, you're not done yet. And I'm thinking, what do you mean I'm not done yet? Of course I'm done. I'm not going to mess with this. This is not something we should be part of. Kept getting that. You're not done yet. You're not done yet. And then it said, you need to take the truth back to where you came from. Well, where I had just come from was the New Age metaphysical realm and the UFO realm. And I'm thinking, what truth? This truth that I've just received on what I think this is? or you're talking about God's word. And I assumed it was God's word. Take the truth, because that's what I just found. Take the God's word back to where you came from. And I'm going, whatever this voice is coming from, I'm saying, I can't do that. I can't take this God's word back to that area. They don't believe it to be the inerrant word of the creator of the universe. They think it's just a bunch of good writings put together by some old men that you can live by. This is probably all I thought at that time, being in the New Age. I said, you got to give me something better than that. And I thought, that should do it. Well, nobody ever told me about talking back to God. And especially as a new believer, I didn't know what the boundaries were, but I was talking back, I guess you could say that. Well, that little voice came back again. The voice said, you already have what you need. And I'm thinking, I'm kind of clueless to this one. I'm not sure what you're referring to, and I don't know what that is. So I went and talked to my Christian lead investigator, finally opened up to him and told him what I'd been experiencing. And he says, the only thing we have are recorded testimonies of abduction experiencers. And I said, that's correct. He says, maybe there's something in there we missed. So we went back and started watching the interviews that we recorded. And we got to this one. Yeah, that was to change my life from forever. This one, Bill Defendahl was his name. Bill was coming to our meetings, and he wanted to share his stories about experiences he'd had. He'd had UFO sighting experiences. He'd had abduction experiences. Bill worked maintenance at the Kennedy Space Center during the shuttle program. Bill actually had experiences while he was working on the Kennedy Space Center. That's crazy stuff there. And I'm thinking, is this stuff real with him? Then he wanted us to interview him for his abduction experience. And we interviewed him. And this is one of the tapes that we ended up watching again. I had interviewed him about 6 months prior to this review of me becoming, review of his video and me becoming a Christian. So my partner and I, as we sat there and watched it again, I'm looking at it and I'm listening, and I look at my partner and I said, do you remember this? Because for some reason I don't. I remember sitting in his living room. I remember interviewing him, but I don't remember this information that he said. And he says, I don't either. And remember, this is 6 months before I was able to hear the truth as a Christian. And what Bill was telling us was about a particular experience where he stopped the experience while it was happening by calling out the name and authority of Jesus Christ. During this terrible experience, he cries out, Jesus, Jesus, help me. And immediately he wakes up in the bed, no longer in the experience, but instantly in the bed. And I looked at my partner and I said, if this is real, this is huge. This I can take back to the UFO community where I came from. But I had to understand whether this was real or not. Keep in mind, there's a lot of people out there that tell a lot of stories that aren't real, and a lot of stories with no evidence. So I needed to find out, as authentic as this case is, before I start sharing it as something that I could stand on. So I took his case story and I called up some of the leading abduction researchers in the world at the time. Remember, back then we had house phones with phone books where you could look up somebody's number and call them. Now, unless they gave you the number on their cell phone, you can't call them, So back then it was easy to find these leading researchers. And I said, guys, I've got an unusual case here, and I'd like to share it with you and get your review of it. And they said, oh, please do. So I shared Bill's case to them. every single one of them, once I shared the story of what Bill shared with us, they all asked the same thing. Can we go off the record from here if we're going to continue this talk? And I said, yeah, I don't mind being off the record. I just want to know what I'm dealing with here. I just need help. Give me some help. Help me understand this. And once that was agreed, which what they were asking for was anonymity. So I can't tell you who I talked to, but I can tell you what they said. As a MUFON representative, we have to respect anonymity. We're bound by law as MUFON members. If somebody asks to have their name withheld, that we do that. So you can trust me if you come to me and you don't want your name shared. I'll keep it. I've kept names for 30 some years now. So what I got from each of these guys was the same answers. Is the one common answer that was amongst them in the beginning was, we didn't know. No, let me get back to where I was. What they said was, we also found cases like that in our research. And I said, wait a minute. All of the research we've read that you guys have published said that abductions cannot be stopped. And you're telling me you have similar cases where somebody's been able to stop their experience? And they said, yes, through singing a Christian hymn, through reciting scripture, through calling out to Jesus, through prayer, any number of these avenues. And I said, then why hasn't this been shared in the research findings for everybody to see? And this is where their answer came in. We were afraid to go there because it might affect our credibility in the UFO research community. I'd have been fine with that answer. That's an honest answer. They didn't know what to make of it. But I think they felt a little guilty in their souls because they followed through with another answer to try and cover it up. And that was, we were afraid to go there because it might affect our credibility. That's the key issue right there. That's what they were concerned about. They were concerned about how they would look dealing with this with a spiritual level. So they decided not to talk about it. Well, I told them, I said, look, I work for a living. I do this research stuff on the side, but you've now confirmed that this case I have is probably a real case. It's authentic. It happened the way he says, because you're telling me there's more of them just like it. And I said, as a matter of fact, I'm going to go looking for those other ones because I believe this is a missing piece of the UFO puzzle that needs to be brought to the table. And I said, I'm going to find those cases, I'm going to document them, and I'm going to make them available for peer review. And that's what we've been doing at CE4 Research for the past 30 years, is documenting those cases one after the other to build up a database of case histories, all similar to being the same as being able to stop it in the name and authority of Jesus Christ, to where when I can stand up and share this information at a conference or a talk, I can say, how many cases does it take for you to understand what I'm saying here is the truth and it's real? Because give me a number. I'm going to be able to show you that eventually. They're still coming in 30 years later. When I do podcasts like this and people hear my work that have never heard it before, some of those people, you look at the comments and you will see people saying in there, I too did that. I too am one of those testimonies. And if you go back and look at all the YouTube videos of podcasts that I've done, I've dealt with over 700 cases myself in 30 years. But I'm telling you, there's thousands of them in the comments that I didn't get to talk to. So this is not something that Crazy Joe's come up with. This is something that I found and I brought to light because it was being hidden. And I think the more we bring it to light, the more this will explode and we'll get to understand that this is the true nature that's behind this. Everything that I did in this research as an agnostic humanist brought me zero answers. Everything I did in the research as a New Age practitioner brought me zero information and answers. But as a Christian, I've got answers to all the questions that they're still asking from the secular point of view. Can this be stopped? Why does it have to happen to certain people? What is its purpose? I've got answers to all three of those questions in my research findings, where they're still asking the same questions.
So it's been such a pleasure listening to you talking, and you did me such a favor. Instead of coming up with questions and asking you to analyze chapter by chapter, you already analyzed a big chunk of the beginning of your book by just sharing your story and testimony. And many times I just caught myself while you were talking, as I envisioned myself being with you in the office, learning, hearing about these things, talking with eyewitnesses, going through these lectures and studies, learning some new shocking information for the first time, and how excited or maybe even confused you were. And we all have a path of growing and walking. And I just think it's just fascinating how you went through all of this and found answers, but not just the answers. Your quest, so to speak, or purpose is finding questions. Was not like, oh, let me just publish. By the way, book is amazing. I provided a link of both Joe's website and the link to this book. So buy for yourself, buy for your friends. It's an amazing book. So your quest was not just like, oh, let me publish the book, get this information, make some money, and go away. No, you're like, hey, I want to come on podcast. I'm not even charging. I want this information out there because all of these people who've been dealing with sleep paralysis, who've been dealing with paranoia, who've been dealing with stress and fear, dealing with these entities, being attacked, and didn't know how to deal with that. Because I spoke with a number of people who believed they saw something, they saw ghosts, they saw cryptids, they saw aliens, they had sleep paralysis. I had sleep paralysis a few times in my life. Interestingly, the first time it happened when I became a Christian. Very soon after that. Before that, I never had it. So throughout the years, I learned that people witness a lot of stuff. They don't always know which category of the being or entity they would classify everything they're seeing. But I noticed that many times they have fear and anxiety of sharing this information with others because others tend to ridicule them and belittle them. So your work, I believe, is important also for that aspect, because you will not judge them, you will not ridicule them. You're coming from agnostic background, then you deal with the New Age lenses, and then Christian. So you understand people from different walks of life can come to you and say, Joe, I have this problem, I had this vision, I had this dream, I had this attack, spiritual attack, can you please help me? And you will never ridicule them because you walked in their shoes. So I find your work very important for all the people out there, regardless of their age, ethnicity, race, religion, philosophy, politics, whatever division we have today, because people can see themselves in a lot of your work. So I want to say how much I appreciate you and your work, brother. First in the line of questions I have for you is, can we please help people understand when you say CE4? I know what it is, but for people who don't know what the abbreviation stands for, what is CE4?
Okay. CE4 actually stands for Close Encounters, Fourth Kind. Back in the, I guess it was the 70s, Jack Ballet, working with Dr. Hynek, they came up with a classification of the phenomenon. You got the CE1, which is basically just a light in the sky that catches your attention. It's unidentified. You got your CE2, where it's making maneuvers, still a light, but unidentified. Then you got CE3, Close Encounter, the Third Kind. We're all familiar with that from Steven Spielberg's movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That's contact, okay? Then you have Close Encounters, the Fourth Kind, which is CE4, the organization that I do my research under. I kept it simple, so, be remembered easy. But CE4 research. So what we look at is the phenomenon from the abduction perspective. Remember, originally I was looking at it as a MUFON field investigator, tracking sighting reports. So that would have been either looking at CE1 or CE2s. So here it is. We decided to focus on strictly the abduction experience to find our answers for the truth. And we decided to name the research group CE4, Close Encounter Fourth Kind Research. There is a 5 and the CE5. Some of your listeners might be familiar with the CE5 protocol that's being promoted by Dr. Stephen Greer. That's contact mentally with these beings. And then you've got close encounters of the sixth kind that deal with injury and death from an experience. So there's all classifications on where you put the event that you're investigating. That the reason is it makes it easier to track and easier to query in your database of reports.
Yeah, when you were talking about injuries and having context of this sixth kind, I was just thinking about this movie. I didn't plan on mentioning this during the podcast, but since we're going live and since we're talking about anything that comes through our mind, have you seen this movie? It's a really cool and scary movie that came out 2 years ago. It's about aliens coming and abducting and hurting people, and this girl is a main character in it. And the thing is, even though it's a sci-fi, and a lot of things we see in sci-fi movies, TV shows, comics. I'm a big nerd, so I like all of these things. The thing is, for people who are mere fans and they don't see it as anything else but fiction, the thing is that a lot of these authors, willingly, unwillingly, knowingly, unknowingly, they're telling us also this. There's also a spiritual kernel of truth in a lot of their works, because they're telling us about this deception that is real. We may call them as aliens, but these entities, when I interviewed, you mentioned Jacques Vallée, he believes that the aliens are interdimensional beings or spiritual beings. When I interviewed Christian scientist, he's one of my heroes. My mind is stuck now. I'll come up with his name later. He was telling me that when he was dealing as a scientist with all these people, he said, and eyewitnesses and reports, he said, yeah, it's impossible that mere physical entities can develop this velocity, not leave any trace in the air. It doesn't matter what technology they possess. So like he said, these are interdimensional beings. We covered the whole episode when it comes to Dr. Hugh Ross. Yes, I interviewed him 2 years ago. He worked for NASA. He's an astrophysicist. He wrote over 20 books. He's always trying to reconcile the science and the Bible. He's a phenomenal and brilliant-minded and very kind person. He never puts people down who offend him or attack him. He's always so calm. He always likes learning and investigating. And I interviewed him when it came. Well, I was kind of starting this podcast, so it was like episode 22, I think, more than 2 years ago. And I say, hey, Dr. Hugh Ross, let's talk about the sons of God in Genesis 6, their identity, and let's talk about this little green man. And he was telling me basically what Jacques Vallée and what you were telling me, that these are, again, interdimensional or spiritual beings who are not coming, as you mentioned in your book, they're coming usually to say, hey, we're brothers from another, universe, or maybe from another star system. We have a message of hope and peace. Many times they mention ecology. They're talking about preserving life. And you're like, wow, this is all good. But isn't this how so many New Age and other books and fallen religious systems, how was the Book of Humanity written? How did the Mormonism start? It's all very similar, different than God, how God was using prophets and apostles. There is a real danger when it comes to these interdimensional beings, and this is who they are. They have an ability to camouflage and shapeshift and appear themselves in the ways and shapes and forms they want to people. Some people may call them shadow people. Some people may call them as aliens or whatever. But the thing is, these beings do not have warm, good thoughts and desires for humankind. So maybe we can switch by you covering their desires, their plans. I also want to say that I interviewed also a couple of years ago another MUFON researcher. His name was Tobias Wayland. He's locally here from Chicago, and we were talking about the topic of the Mothman sightings, not just in Virginia, but also in Lake Michigan area. it was another fascinating topic and episode with him. So when I was thinking about you working for MUFON, I was also thinking about him. He's not a Christian, but I had no problem interviewing him because we both shared same fascination for this supernatural stuff. So I just wanted to give that as the background. But yeah, if you can please share with us something that associated me with your story and with this movie that we're seeing the trailer in the background. Who are these beings? Are they interdimensional? What is the data? And how can we know their motives?
All right. You want to get into the good stuff. Well, let's see where I can start with that. Well, in the early part of the research, I didn't have anything that was telling me, even as a Christian looking at this from the biblical perspective, I still wasn't convinced there wasn't something physical to the experience, that the ability for these entities to actually take people was something that they could do. I didn't have any evidence to show me that that wasn't the truth. And that was the line that every other researcher was putting out there, that people were actually being taken from their beds, through the ceiling, through a craft, and things being done to them on the craft. But, something inside of me kept saying, I guess the old agnostic humanist in me kept saying, this doesn't make any sense. These things can't defy gravity. They can't defy physics as we know it. Physics are physics. It's universal. It's going to affect us the same here or the same someplace else. Everything I was hearing about, well, they could be using this, they could be using warp drive, they could be using all these things to get here from far distances. But none of that was science. People were talking pseudoscience or science fiction to try to explain the existence of extraterrestrials, not real science, because the idea that they can come here vast distances is insane. On the whole concept of that doesn't make any sense when you really get into it. One of the best descriptions of what I'm trying to say is my partner and friend of many years, Gary Bates from Creation Ministries International, in his book, Alien Intrusion, UFOs and the Evolution Connection. I spent a lot of time working with Gary. I worked with him when he was putting his book together before it released in 2005. He actually gave me a chapter in there of my work using the supporting evidence or what he was showing. Alien Intrusion is a great book. Covers all the aspects of this phenomenon. Gary did a great job. Working with Gary, we came across something. He actually brought it to my attention first. Because of this not having any actual evidence to show that people weren't being taken anywhere, we just had to stay with the standard line that yes, they were. That the experience had a physicality to it. But he brought something to my attention that he wanted me to look at. He says, I think there's something different here going on. And he referred me to a TV show that he used to watch, and it was out of England. It was about a gentleman named Darren Brown. And you can find his shows on YouTube if you want to go look them up. They're fantastic shows to watch. I've watched them because I wanted to understand more about what Gary was trying to explain to me. And what Gary was saying, he says, if you watch Darren's shows, Darren Brown calls himself a mentalist, okay? And he's a performer, understand that. He uses stage hypnosis and extreme power of suggestion on people in his show to get people to actually believe something that is a lie. Okay. And then you get to see the whole process happen with the person that he's doing this to, the person that has been chosen to have this done to. And then you get to the end of the show and they'll bring him up on stage in this huge auditorium where all these people are at. And a lot of times the guy's parent or relative might be there to vouch, for what Darren's going to say. And I'll never forget, one of the best examples I saw was he took this guy and he was asking him, he says, can you tell me your favorite toy as a child? And all this background stuff where the guy, Darren's planting suggestion is what he's doing. Suggestive colors, suggestive items, things to sway the guy's memory. And what he convinced the guy to say through suggestion, human suggestion, is that his favorite toy was a red bicycle that his mom bought him. Okay? And his mind built a whole memory around that. But it was a lie. When he got into the end of the show and they brought him up on stage and he explained to him that he'd been lied to, he'd been duped, that look on his face, that look was what Gary was talking about. He says, I see the same look on these experiencers when they talk about their story. He says, but Darren's people are telling us, or Darren's telling us, that those people never had that happen to them, or the memory itself wasn't real. Could that be the same thing we're seeing with the abduction experience? And I thought, Gary, that's incredible idea. I said, there is a way to check this out, I believe. So what I did is I went back and I re-interviewed a good number of the cases that I had, that I was still in contact with. What I wanted to do was take them back, and I use guided questioning. I never use hypnosis. I don't believe in hypnosis. I don't believe it should be used as Christians. I think it opens us up to something that we shouldn't be open to. I think that if you do the proper guided questioning, you're going to remember what I'm asking for. I need to give you an example before I get into this. Let's say I ask you to tell me about your last birthday. You remember your last birthday? You remember about this much of it. The most exciting, impacting, memorable part is right here in the front. And that's the 2 minutes you'll tell me about your last birthday. But if I sit you down and I do proper guided questioning, and I can take you through it, even if it's a dozen times, by the time we get to the end, it'll take you half the day to tell me about your birthday compared to the first 2 minutes that it took when you first started. Because I can get you to trigger those memories. Why can I do that? Because they are here. You lived them. They're still here. It's you pushing them back to the back because they weren't important to you, but they're still there. What happened was, and what we were seeing with the abduction experiencers, the same thing that the secular researchers were seeing. The secular researchers using hypnosis were confused because they were getting to certain points in the stories where, while they were under, they couldn't recall. It were blanks in the story. But there's no blanks in your birthday story, is there? Because it was all there. The reason the blanks are there, I say, the secular researchers will tell you that it's screen memories that the aliens put on the experiencers' minds, so they can't remember everything. I say that's bunk, because I found the same thing doing guided questioning. What it's telling me is it's not that they put a screen memory or a screen on their thoughts or their memories to blank them out. What happened was they never happened. They weren't real to life stories, events of something happening like your birthday. You actually lived your birthday. But these experiences that these people were having, they did not actually live it. It's in here, but they didn't live it. They were not taken to a craft. Nobody is. What's happening is these beings are giving the experiencers in a sleep state a spiritual, demonic, deceptive, implanted memory That's what the abduction experience is. It's not real. People say, but I've gotten marks from the experience. I've had bruises and scratch marks. Let me tell you something. These entities can create those marks. They can create those bruises. Anything to perpetuate the experience to convince you it was real. Okay? So what they're doing when they give you this memory is they're giving you the most impacting, sensational thing to remember. You won't forget it, and it's all they have to give you. I'll give you an example. You ever been to a play? Okay, let's go to that play. You're sitting in the audience. You've already seen the first scene. Now it's time to do a scene change. The curtain's still open. Guys run out. They grab all the stuff. They take it away. They start bringing new scene parts out. First thing they bring out is a wall. Wall's got a doorway and a window in it. They bring out another wall, and they put it 90 degrees to the other one. The other wall's got a fireplace and a mantle and a picture over the mantle. Now they bring out a couch and an end table and a lamp on it. What's the scene? Do you know yet? It's a living room. They're building a living room as the scene. But it doesn't take any more than that for you to realize that's a living room. But is that as detailed as your living room? Or like your office? Is it detailed as that? No, it doesn't need to be for you to get the idea. That's the type of visionary experience that it's given to these people. Just enough to make it impacting, sensational, and enough convincing. They don't need all the details. That's why this whole thing has been confusing. So there is no physical taken to a spaceship. It's not happening. This is a spiritual visionary experience. Even Carla Turner, the late Dr. Carla Turner, her and her family were experiencers. She says in here, according to Dr. Carla Turner, who worked with over 400 alien abduction cases, the phenomenon includes some of the following details. Aliens can alter our perceptions of our surroundings. Aliens can control what we think we see. They can appear to us in any number of guises and shapes. Aliens can be present with us in an invisible state and make themselves temporarily, partially visible. Those are just a few of the quotes coming from her. She saw this as what it was. I never hear anything as far as before she died. She died of cancer back in the mid-90s. I'm not sure if she ever got to the absolute truth that this was a demonic delusion, but she was so spot on understanding the way this phenomenon works. And I just want people to know this is not Crazy Joe coming up with these answers. This is information that has been there from some of the leading researchers in the past. It's just that this is not what is being pushed out there as today's agenda. But it still has to be looked at because it's still part of the phenomena. Don't let the talking heads that are out there pushing the agenda today sway you from what's really going on, which is what they're doing. We see two camps out there right now. We see, you see the whistleblowers in Congress. All of that is about biological entities from other worlds. Every bit of it is about biological, physical entities from other worlds. But then you've got the other secular camp that's been looking at this for quite some time and have seen a change and have started to look at that difference. And I saw that big change happen to start about 2008, where pretty much the line that everybody towed with these were biological entities from another system. But then about 2008, I started hearing some of the leading researchers in the community starting to question what this was. They're saying this we might need to look at this from another perspective, they were saying. this might be something other than what we thought it was. It seemed to be something more interdimensional or extra dimensional or hyperdimensional. So we ended up with two camps being split. And I think the secular researchers are closer in thinking that it's an interdimensional. They're closer to the truth than what we're hearing from the congressional hearings about this being physical beings from other worlds. I think there's the big agenda. They both got agendas, but that's the big one, because everything we hear coming out of the congressional hearings is fear. They're putting fear into us about this phenomenon. Everything's about this could be harmful to our airspace. That's what you keep hearing. And the government agencies are saying, we're here to protect you. Okay. They want to be our protectors. Well, through our findings in CE4 research, I don't need them as a protector. They need us, because what we found is these beings can be stopped through the name and authority of Jesus Christ every time. And that's something that's not being brought up. Tucker Carlson made the best point on that to Joe Rogan. He told Joe Rogan in an interview, he said, they don't want us to look at spirit. They're doing everything they can to keep us from looking in that direction. And I see that more and more. They don't want it to look at this part of the information. They don't want this part of the information to be real.
By the way, have you heard about Tucker's testimony from, I don't know, 6 to 12 months ago, when he said that he was demonically mauled in his dream? That was wild. We had an episode dedicated just to his experience when I invited a former New Ager guy, Sean, who's he's my co-host, and a pastor, Ben. So three of us dissected, and we're talking about the reality of this and how serious is spiritual warfare. Because if you're a target by the enemy and by the spiritual beings, it's for a good reason. Now, I don't follow much Tucker Carlson. I'm not so much into politics as a foreigner. I do follow a little bit, but not too much. But I'm thinking they don't just, like my pastor says in general, especially when it comes to your spiritual life as a Christian, the devil doesn't attack the dead horse. So why would you be attacked? There must be some purpose. There must be some higher goal when it comes to your life and your calling, because why would you be otherwise so much attacked that there is either, I mean, even physical scars would appear on your body. There must be something when it comes to that. It's not a coincidence. That's all I wanted to say. Sorry for interrupting.
Well, that actually brings me up to the next two questions that the secular realm is still asking. Why does it happen to certain people? I can get into what we found. Also, the other question is, what is the actual purpose of the phenomenon? Both of those you just brought up, and I can cover those on our findings right now. When we started looking at why this experience happens to certain people and not others, we came up with some interesting answers to that. The secular realm has no answers. They got zero, even today. They're throwing out ideas like your Rh negative blood, or this is a genetic trait that you've gotten from somewhere in your bloodline, blah, 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 blah. No evidence for any of it to be real. The only thing we did find that is real, that fits every single time that we do, a background investigation on why does this happen to the people, is we found three answers, not just one, but three. You either fit one of the answers or a combination of the three. Why does this happen to certain people? Number one, you ask for it. And you think, who in their right mind would ask for this? I'm sorry, I'm one of those people that did that. Don't do that. Don't ever just cry out, show me this, or I'd like to experience that. You've got to be specific to who you're asking to, or somebody out there unknown to you, and an entity can give you that experience, and it may not be for your good. I've been at conferences where we had our tables set up in the vendor areas. People come by, they look at our stuff we have out there. They're so busy, they're just looking everywhere. I hear comments like, "Oh, abductions, I'd like to have that to know what it's really like." Be careful what you ask for, people. Number two, I think, is the larger group that people fit into that are experiencers. Number two, what we found was you unknowingly opened the door to this experience. And you go, well, how does that happen? Well, you're dabbling in something that the Bible, God's holy word, says do not mess with. Because you opened yourself up to that realm by messing with it, the entities see that you've given them right for them to mess with you. And you may have never known, I say unknowingly, never known that that would lead to that. But it has. I can take you back through the guided questioning to the root cause of you either opened it up yourself asking for it, or you unknowingly were dabbling in things that are related to this paranormal phenomenon.
And I just want to add here that Ouija board is one of those dangerous tools that people like playing with. So if you're doing that or your kids, please do yourself a favor and throw it in the garbage. It's not something that is like, oh, we're being superstitious. I've read and heard so many testimonies of people once when playing with the Ouija board, they'll have demonic attacks in their home, even though before that they never experienced that. And sometimes they will hunt them down, even if they would move to another location. So don't play with the occult, please.
Actually, what you're talking about right there is the hitchhiker syndrome referred to in ufology. Is many researchers getting involved in this phenomenon end up getting what is called the hitchhiker effect. Because they're looking into this dark stuff, things come home with them and they start experiencing things themselves. So basically, I would say that's number two, because they didn't realize they were unknowingly opening doors that they weren't supposed to. Number three, this one puzzled us for a while. Until went back to scripture and actually found the answer in scripture where we should. And the third one was because I had people come to me and said, I don't fit those two reasons. There must be another reason. I said, well, why do you say that? And they said, well, I've had this experience since I can remember as a child, as young as 4 or 5 years old. And it's continued through my life. But at 4 or 5 years old, I couldn't have knowingly asked for this. I couldn't have even unknowingly dabbled in it because none of that was privy to me in my knowledge at 4 or 5 years old. And I said, you're right. There's got to be something else here. So as we went back to scripture, I was able to find something that I think answers that question. And what I looked at was the way that God set down the structure of the human family. God says that the man of the house is to keep the spiritual covering over his family. If that father is not doing that, if he's dabbling in things that he shouldn't be dabbling in, by not keeping a spiritual covering over his family, the other members of his family, even his children, are susceptible to the wiles of the enemy. And that was answering the number three. Every time I went back and re-interviewed the experiencers about what they remember about their childhood and their family life, every time you could find the open door with the parents. So it's very, very important, the spiritual covering we keep over our families as Christians. We're the protectors of our family. And fathers, if you're not doing it, you need to get on board, because that might be why your children are having so many problems. Just a thought. And then we get to that last question is, what's the purpose of this phenomenon? So we have to step back a little bit and look at this from a more distant perspective and look at the results or the effect on people who have a UFO sighting experience or an abduction experience. What we found was a common effect amongst everybody that's entered this field of study. or had an experience in this field. The same is with everyone that gets involved. It takes their eyes away from the one true God and gets it to look somewhere else, and it gets them to doubt God's holy word. Did he really mean that? Did he really say that? Is that what he really meant for you to understand? By the way, where have we heard that before? Right from the garden. The same lie from the garden we're still dealing with today. The enemy doesn't even need to change it. The enemy only repackages it, puts a new wrapper on it, makes it one that's more acceptable to today's time and culture in history. And that is exactly what I believe we're dealing with. In essence, what we're seeing today with the gray alien that everybody's encountering, or the alien of any type, is the emperor's new clothes. I think that this is the same demonic presence that's been there from the beginning of time in the garden, trying to deceive humanity. We are at a war. Let me put it this way. The way I look at the Bible, I look at it as two books. It can be both. It can be one or the other at any one time, or it can be both at the same time. What I see our Bible as is a book of love of the Creator and his creation. He lost contact with his creation in the garden, and he's done everything possible through the bringing of his son to die for us, to be able to bring that contact back together, so that we can walk with God again, as Adam and Eve did in the garden. That could only happen through the redemptive process of Jesus Christ, his son. That's love. But at the same time, everything that made that happen was because it's a book of war. It's telling us about a warfare that happened in the beginning and still continues to the end of time. And it's a war for our souls. This delusion is a test for that, of who do you serve. I believe, looking at this from a scriptural perspective, that what we're seeing here playing out is the strong delusion spoken about in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. It's an end-time prophetic message. It's supposed to happen near the end times. And it's a strong delusion that will come upon humanity that will test their faith in Jesus Christ and God himself, and test our faith in God's word. That's the purpose of the strong delusion, to say, who do you serve? This strong delusion that we're seeing with this paranormal and UFO phenomenon is identical to what Bible is describing that this would happen. It would test your faith. And that's what I believe this is exactly what we're seeing here. I believe we're seeing the strong delusion playing out. And it's not just the UFO phenomenon. It's anything of the paranormal and occult and dark nature. It's any of that. It's whatever doorway you chose to turn away from God. Because the enemy's got a million doors out there. Which one do you choose? Which one can I help you with? Which one are you looking for answers for? But what does Jesus say? He says, I stand at the door and knock. All you got to do is let him in. So many people have had their lives destroyed by this experience and have had nowhere to go. And
yeah,
I tell you,
before you continue, I'd just like to say that I agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't think it's the only I don't think it's the great deception, but I believe it's a huge part of this final days and the great deception, including the whole New Age movement, false religions, cults, rise of the neo-paganism, all these techniques of self-help. And I'm not talking self-help like how can you lose weight, how can you look younger, sleep better. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about spiritual practices that God would not condone. I'm talking about spiritual realm where you actually yield to certain spirits in order to make this personal covenant with them so that you can thrive in your life through different areas of your life. By unconsciously doing this, you are yielding and bowing your spirit to someone else except God. And this is 101 in the Old Testament. We will go what will be idolatry, what will be Israelites doing throughout their whole history. They'll be bowing to Baals, they'll be bowing to Marduk, they'll be bowing to Ishtar, they'll be bowing to all these real small e Elohim entities. They're not Yahweh, they're not God, but they're still powerful and more powerful and stronger than your regular demons that possess people. And that's the real danger, because these entities can help you,
Yes.
can give you what you want, but the
Yes.
price is your soul. But thank God that despite of our craziness and silly, foolish mistakes, and let's be honest, even as Christians, we make tons of mistakes. But thank God that He can redeem us from those false covenants, and where people say, oh, they sold their souls to the devil. Thank God that He can redeem us and restore us and buy us back, because His blood is way more powerful and precious than all of these entities.
Absolutely. And kind of what you were describing there, one of the part of this delusion is the CE5 protocol. The CE5 protocol from Dr. Stephen Greer, he's promoting this concept that through the CE5 protocol initiative, you can have contact with these entities yourself personally. That's spiritism of the 1800s all over again. You don't know who you're opening yourself up to. And that's what's interesting. I've talked to people online that want to participate in this CE5 stuff. And I ask them, I said, let me ask you a question. I said, you don't know me, but if I come to your house and I knock on the door, you're going to let me in? No, because I don't know you. I said, but at the same time, you're opening your mind up to an entity that you have no idea who they are. And you have children in the house with you. You have any idea how dangerous that can be? They're just clueless, because they're people are reaching out wanting something special. They want special knowledge. They want quick gratification. And if this is a way to get it, this is what entices people. And this is one of the phenomena that does it.
I have a controversial question, not for the sake of being controversial, but because you mentioned it, but also I heard it elsewhere. Namely, some people, some abductees, they report, being sexually violated, to put it in nice terminology that won't cancel the podcast. Also, in my other research and reading some other eyewitness reports, when it comes to cow mutilation, when they found animals mutilated and with 0 drops of blood, many times their sexual organs will be missing. And you also mentioned here in the second chapter about these things, or sometimes that people who were contacted, quote unquote, by aliens or by these demonic forces, they would almost like cancel or reject humans if they were like not fertile, or if they had vasectomy, or they had something done on their body. So they're like, oh yeah, you're not good enough to be abducted and tested. And I'm like, why would these entities care about our sexual organs and reproduction? And again, my mind inevitably goes back to Genesis 6. I want to ask you, what is your research telling us?
Our research was showing that we do realize that people aren't really being taken. Okay. So is there an actual genetic hybridization program? If people aren't really being taken physically, then how can there actually be a physical hybrid program? There can't be. What I'm seeing is the sexual nature of this. The idea that they're giving them the memory that they're being taken, impregnated, having babies, hybrid babies, and then later visitations where they want them to hold the baby because the aliens have no feelings, should I say, and the baby needs it because it's a hybrid. All of this is just for control. Remember, keep in mind that most abductees are female. I've got some ideas on why that is, but I won't get into that. I can't make it to where I've got enough to say that yes, this is what it is, but I've got my opinion on why that is, but that's different. But what I do know about female experiencers is when you hit them with the concept dealing with the maternal instinct, that is probably the most powerful force that you can find dealing with women, is that maternal instinct. You only have to make them think that this happened to them. It doesn't have to happen to them at all. But by putting the thought of it in their mind, and they're thinking that it's as real can be, the experience, then they're going to believe it actually happened to them. But it doesn't. It's not actually happening. It's still that implanted thought. But the whole thing is about control. You control that woman when you control her, when you're dealing with maternal instincts. You can convince her through these implanted memories that she's been taken, pregnated, baby made, and now she needs to help them with it. You own her. And I'm telling you, those are the hardest ones to bring back, because any people that we help in this phenomenon from abductions, it's hard for them to come back. It's hard for them to accept that they've been duped. For any person, any human being, it's the most difficult thing for us as humans to stop and admit, I was wrong. Ego gets in the way, embarrassment gets in the way, pride gets in the way. But at some point, you have to say, I was wrong. To become a believer in Jesus Christ, at some point, you got to say, I was wrong. I sinned against you. Same thing. This enemy knows this. This enemy is using this as a tool, but it's not real. The whole concept of this hybridization is being misused, the whole information on it. Because you know how much evidence we got for hybridization? Zero. Again, absolute zero. And I know that people have spent careers trying to research this part of it and trying to tie it into the subject of giants in the Bible. And you can't do that. You can talk about giants all you want, but don't tie it into this phenomenon. It's not part of this phenomenon. These people are not making hybrids like is spoken of and believed of by people that say that from Genesis 6:4. That's not what's happening here. It's a delusion. It's a purposeful delusion, and it's not real. Okay? So to think this whole thing is mixed with this hybridization from Scripture, that's absolutely wrong. And I've got my own problems with the idea of hybridization in the Scripture itself. I think you got to throw out a whole lot of Scripture to be able to make that work. But that's a whole nother talk.
Joseph, I know we have so many things to cover, and I'm looking for a sequel. I don't know, January or February, whenever you have time, because you just told me that you're working on another project, and then you released recently another book.
Anytime you want me on, I'm here for you.
Cool, because this proved through the number of the live views to be one of the most popular episodes recently I did in months. So I'm excited. I'm also excited how God will use this episode for the benefit of many. So yeah, if you're watching this, it doesn't matter if you're Christian or non-Christian, feel free to subscribe, to share this material, question your doubts, question your beliefs. I'm a former agnostic. Joseph is a former agnostic. So yeah, you're loved and you are accepted by us. So I have a question. When it comes to Hippie Bob, that was such a cool story in your chapter 3, how the enemy used him to threaten you and to tell you certain things. So he was almost programmed and used as a prophet, but in a negative sense to talk to you.
Exactly.
Can you please briefly tell us about this?
Yeah, the story of Hippie Bob. It's in my book. That's what he's talking about. Right in the beginning, take you back to the beginning of the research as a Christian. When I came across Bill's case, and I had already talked to the researchers, I confirmed that Bill had an authentic case. And then we started putting it out there that we were looking for those type of cases, and cases started coming in. So I might have had about 50 cases by this time that Hippie Bob's story comes into effect. Hippie Bob was a good friend of mine that I worked with at a leading boat company that I spent 24 years with back, and that's where I was working back in the 90s. And we worked together. And when I got into the UFO stuff, I knew Hippie Bob before I was even interested in the UFO stuff. So when I did get into the into the UFO stuff, oh, he had a field day. He had the best jokes, the best things to say to me, and I took it all in fun. But what he wasn't telling me was the important stuff, because what he wasn't telling me until later was that he'd been having experiences himself, and the only way he knew to cope with it was to ridicule me, who I was researching it. That was his coping mechanism, and we had a lot of fun with it. He had some good jokes. He could have taken it live on stage easily, but Hippie Bob was a character, believe me. And one night I was working second shift. I ran the weld shop for a while, and I was working second shift. I got off about 11, got home about 11:20 from work. And a Thursday, we were working 410s, Monday through Thursday. So I had Friday off, and he worked day shift. And I saw him during the overlap when I came in, and he was leaving every day. And this particular Thursday night, I get a phone call when I got back to the house. My house phone rang. This before everybody was just cell phones. And Bob called me at night, and he was kind of in a panic. And I said, Bob, what's up? And he goes, man, he says, I haven't talked to you and told you this, but I've been having experiences. And I said, yeah, we should talk about that. And I said, I know it's late and you probably need to get to bed too. He says, no, I can talk right now a little bit. And I said, okay. He says, the experiences were never bad. He says, I enjoyed them. He said they were very colorful beings, they're like beings of light. And but he says, something's changed. And he says, I don't know what it is. And I said, what do you mean it's changed? He says, well, I had experiences tonight and they were horrible. And I don't know what to make of it. The only person I knew to call was you, and I needed to talk. I said, okay. And he started telling me that him and his girlfriend, they shot pool for a local bar. They were on a pool team. They like to do competitive shooting pool. And they were going to one of the other bars to compete against another team. And he wasn't driving. His girlfriend was driving. And they played the first time. And on the way to the second place, they had another game to meet later. An experience happened to him while he was in the car. And he's in the passenger side, and he's panicking, and he goes out, and then he comes back to, and he's got this memory of a horrific experience with these beings, not like what he's had before. So he's all upset about this. But they go on to play at the next bar, but he's really got him concerned. They leave the bar, the second bar, and they're on the way home, and he's in the passenger seat, and he's telling his girlfriend, he says, they're coming again. She goes, who's coming? We got visitors coming to the house? She says, no, they're coming to take me. What are you talking about? And right about that time, he slumps over, and only about 2 minutes pass, and he comes back up startled. And later he recalls that time, that 2 minutes seemed like a long period of time. So there's that time distortion that you see in these phenomenon. But he comes to, and he's really freaked out now. And now he's never told his girlfriend he's been having these experiences. So she don't know what's happening. She thought something really bad physical's happening, medically's happening to him. So when he gets to the house, first thing he does is gets in there and he calls me, because he knows I'm just getting off work and I'm up. So he got me on the phone and he's explaining all this to me. And I said, Bob, man, this is crazy. And I said, well, we can set up to meet you in the morning, and talk to you about this and try to find out more about it, get some sleep tonight. and I told him, I said, they're not going to harm you. I said, trust me on this. I said, this may be frightening, but it's not real and it's not going to harm you. So trust me on that. Try to get some sleep and we'll be over first thing in the morning. Before he got off the phone, he says, it's happening again. And I said, what? He says, right now, they're coming again. I said, is your girlfriend right there? He says, yeah. I said, put her on the phone. And I want to keep her on the phone till you come back out of this. He goes, okay. And he hands her the phone and she goes, who are you and what's happening to Bob? And I explained to her who I was. I was a friend. I was a researcher. And Bob's confided in me that he's been having these experiences. And I said, trust me, he's going to be okay. Don't freak out. He's going to be back just like he was in the car. And he's not going to be harmed. He's going to be upset, but he's not going to be harmed. And so I got her to calm down. Well, lo and behold, while I got her on the phone, I hear him come back too. And he's hollering. He goes, give me the phone. Give me the phone. He gets on the phone and he says, they're pissed at you. I went, what? Who's pissed at me, Bob? He says, the aliens are. I says, why are they pissed at me? Because you know what the blank is going on. Bob, do you know what my research is about now? No, I just know you mess with UFOs. So Bob didn't know what I had found in my research, but they did. They knew what I found. This is why they were doing this to Bob, because they didn't want Bob to know the truth. They wanted to control Bob. The next morning, I told Bob, when I was getting off the phone, I said, Bob, you're going to be fine tonight. I says, they're not going to harm you. They can't harm you. I said, just try to get some sleep. I said, we're going to be over in the morning. We'll meet up with you and we'll go through this. So we met up in the morning. I had my best friend Rick with me, who was also a friend of Bob's. Rick's also a Christian. And I had the gal that brought me to Christ with me also. So the three of us went over to talk to Bob. Bob was totally, he had gotten any sleep. He was just wired. He was upset. He didn't know what to make of any of this. So we had him sit in a chair in front of us. And I said, Bob, I'm going to lay out to you what these beings don't want you to know. He goes, you mean what they told me they're pissed at you about? And I said, yeah. He says, great. He said, tell me. So I laid out everything that we had come across in the research so far that he didn't know about. And right as I'm finishing up, he's looking at us with that look on his face of fear again. And he goes, they're coming again. And I said, what? He says, they're coming. They're going to take me. And my girlfriend, she jumps up, runs around behind him, puts her hands on his shoulders and starts rebuking these entities out loud. And then right away, me and Rick got the idea, pray with her. And we did. And then within just a matter of a minute, the look on Bob's face changed. And he looked up and he says, what did you guys just do? And I said, Bob, we didn't do anything that you can't learn to do yourself. And that's how that went with Bob.
I'm being honest, a couple of times or a few times throughout the podcast, I got goosebumps. And this was one of those places. Last question for tonight I have is, if you want to just address briefly when it comes to this whole phenomena of supposed abductees, talking about this entry point when they will be supposedly taken away, having memory loss, time would be missing, and then how you deal with this research. What is the research data telling us when it comes to this memory loss, missing time, and things like that? If you can summarize maybe within a few minutes.
Well, these are all effects we see in this realm. But you know, as I've talked through this already, that the memory loss, there is no memory loss. It's not memory loss, it's memory not given is what it is. Because they're giving us, they're giving the experiencer a memory, a false memory, you know, one that's not real, one that's used to control them, one that's used to take their eyes off the one true God and look somewhere else, which is what happens to everybody. So the tricky part is how do you help people like that? You know, if they've been so duped from the experience because it's so real, how do you bring them out of it? You know, it's almost like deprogramming somebody that's been in a cult. Well, I started seeing patterns all through, right from the very beginning in my research as an agnostic humanist. Before I ever got into abductions, I saw the crazy things in, the just chasing UFOs. Is I kept coming across things that absolutely made no sense. And I'm thinking, why is this? Why do we have these things in this phenomenon that don't make sense? We can't find an answer for it. I'll give you a few, just a few. Do you know there's never, ever, in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of sightings, there's never been a description of two craft identical? Right, that's insane. That doesn't make sense. How can there not be two? With all the vehicles, millions we have on the highway, we've got many replicas because they make models, right? But it doesn't seem like there's specific models in this at all. That doesn't make any sense. The people, the entities themselves, this doesn't make sense. The way they look. In the 50s, when they had the, what do they call it? The gatherings in the desert, giant rock gatherings of the contactees and abductees in the desert in California. They all described the entities that they were in contact with as being humanoids that looked like us, that said they were from planets in our solar system. Well, here come the mid-60s, and NASA's sending probes out to show us what those planets in our solar system look like, and they're not habitable by humans that look like us. So all of a sudden, there's no longer any more beings from the solar system that look like us. They changed. By the mid-70s, we've got Hollywood's version of an alien gray from Steven Spielberg and Whitley Strieber from his Communion book. Well, it's changed again. Now we're seeing interdimensional beings talked about, that they're not physical, that they can shapeshift. They can look like anything they want you to look like. And that's something we see through all this crazy stuff. One of the commonalities, I didn't talk about it on the show, but one of the commonalities that is definitely a red flag, I call these red flags, things that don't make sense. Red flags of ufology is what I call them. And I kept finding more and more and more and more and more things that don't make sense. And one of those was the common theme between UFO abductions, ghosts, spiritism, psychics, fortune tellers. All of them have the same thing in common. You know what that is? Dead people. That's a red flag. Why do we see reports of abduction experiencers telling us they're meeting dead relatives or dead celebrities on a craft, an alien spacecraft? Excuse me, but that makes absolutely no sense at all. That's one of those red flags of ufology. So what I've done is I've taken many of those red flags of ufology and I've now put it into print. I just got this published just a few weeks ago. It's available on Amazon also. In it, I have 45 chapters, short little chapters, all red flags of ufology that don't make sense. In other words, what I found is you can make more sense out of this phenomenon by looking at the things that don't make sense. Okay? And I put them in that book. And just since, it's funny, just since I put this book together, people that have already looked at it, and they come up with more red flags that I didn't think of. So I'm keeping note of those because there's probably going to be a follow-up book. So this is how I help people. Keep in mind, if I'm right on this, and what we're dealing with is a demonic stronghold on people because of the experience, then for you to try and share the biblical truth with them is not very likely. Why? Because of that demonic stronghold. I know, I've tried to do this. You try to share the gospel message with them right away first, they're gone. That spirit that's got the stronghold on them does not want them to hear the gospel message. They will do everything to leave your presence so they don't have to hear it. So you've got to have another way to get through to them to be able to share that gospel message, to bring them to freedom. The way to do that is to start chipping away at that stronghold. Okay? What I mean by that, I'll give you an idea, better understanding. Let's say you're convicted by law for some type of offense and you have to go to court. You have to hire a defense attorney. What is your defense attorney's job to do? It's his job to plant a seed of doubt in one juror. Because for you to be convicted, it's got to be all the jurors in agreement. So he only has to plant that seed of doubt. So these red flags of ufology are those seeds of doubt. You got somebody that's interested in this phenomenon or is following this phenomenon, has gotten bitten by the spirit that's behind it. You need to share this book with them, because this will slam them with so many seeds of doubt that they will only have to go, oh my, this looks like something completely different. As soon as they say that, or they get that look on their face, that's your open door to be able to share the gospel message, because you just broke through the stronghold. That's how I work with helping people.
That's amazing. And I just want to say to the audience that probably in a couple of months, we'll see when exactly, we'll talk about that book. And I just want to say another thing, because you mentioned Derek Gilbert. Derek Gilbert is coming on the podcast next month based on his time, health. Yeah, so I'm excited to talk about different things when it comes to his research, because he published a number of books. He's so much knowledgeable. Yes. What I like about him is that I may not necessarily always agree with the conclusion, but the thing is that he always has scholarly sources. He was like, hey, I was researching this topic. It can be anything. Let's say bulls of Bashan in Psalms, that later would happen to Jesus when he would be crucified. So these were understood by theologians and many researchers to be spiritual beings, demonic attacks, not literal physical enemies. So I'm just giving one example. He would provide sources for that. One of many sources for all of his research will be Dr. Heiser, but he will go elsewhere. So I'm looking forward to have Derek Gilbert for the first time ever, I think next month on the podcast. Maybe you and I can do a sequel in February. Also, I want to share this when it comes to your research on UFO. Again, it matches. This is number one episode on my channel so far. It's episode 22, The Identity of the UFOs, Aliens, and the Sons of God with Dr. Hugh Russ. He also mentioned some of the things that you mentioned like 5-10 minutes ago, but I want to interrupt you. When it comes to identity of these beings, how it is possible, for example, when you mentioned and these entities would first say, oh yeah, we are from the neighbor planets. Then we would discover our technology would advance and we would discover, life is not possible there. So then 5-10 years later, they would choose to disguise themselves with another name coming from another planet. And then with that wouldn't work. Eventually, when our technology would grow and we will learn that's not possible, they'll say, oh, we're now coming from another galaxies. So they will be changing their story after story after story, changing names, changing descriptions, but it's all the same delusion. So Dr. Hugh Russ, again, this is number one episode so far on our channel, he goes through that as a scientist and gives reasons like, which you just mentioned. He said, hey, this is why this is all deception, because, they keep lying to us, to the whole humankind for thousands of years.
Sure. I want to make sure it's clear about the strong delusion. I think this is the most important part about the strong delusion in 2 Thessalonians. We know it's prophetic. That's something that's going to happen at the end time. I think we're seeing it play out right now. What is the strong delusion? The strong delusion we see is being perpetrated by the enemy. They're being able to bring out all the tactics to try and deceive us. But if you look at what the scripture says, who sends the strong delusion? God himself sends this delusion. God himself is testing us with this phenomenon, with this delusion. This is not just a simple game. This is warfare for your eternal soul. How you end up handling this delusion will end up your eternal outcome. You either fall for it or you stay grounded in God's word and you're able to fight through this delusion because you know the truth, because it's there in his word, and you trust and have faith in his word. This is why this is so much bigger than just aliens visiting us from someplace. This is about your eternal soul. So stay grounded in God's word. It's the only litmus paper we have to judge what our life in the world is about. You know, this whole phenomenon, if you look at it, this strong delusion, when I look at how it's playing out, it's identical to the story of Job, where Satan went to Job and says, I want to test Job. You think he is so faithful to you, then you should let me test him to see if he really is. So God allowed it. But God put restrictions on Satan of what he could not do. He could not kill Job. And that's one thing we're seeing in this phenomenon, is with the ability and power of these fallen angels to do what they're doing, they could wipe us out in a heartbeat, but they're bound by God's law that they cannot. They can only deceive us. Sadly, they have deceived people to the point where people have killed themselves because it's driven them crazy. That's a sad effect, but they didn't pull the trigger. The people themselves did. I can't tell you how many testimonies I've gotten to where before people finally came to the truth by reaching out to Jesus Christ, many of them were left sitting on the edge of the bed in despair with a gun in their mouth. But Jesus Christ, by reaching to him, he was able to save them. But that's what the enemy has the capability to do. But they can't outright come and kill us. Just like in the story of Job. It's identical. As far as the testimonies go, there's a story in the Old Testament that reminds me of how I see these testimonies. Go back to the story of Moses and the people in the desert. The people were grumbling that they didn't have food and water, but they did have food and water. They had miraculous food and water. They had manna coming every morning, and they had water that Moses could dry from the rocks with his staff. But they still complained. Even though everything was there for them, they still complained. And God says, I'm done with this complaining. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a fiery snake, and I want Moses put a fiery snake up on that pole. And I'm going to send these fiery snakes to bite the people. The only salvation they have is to look to that pole. So they need to say, do what you're telling them, or they're going to die. This is exactly what we're seeing. These snakes are back. They're biting people right now with the lie of this delusion. The only salvation you have from this delusion is to turn and look at that pole, the pole that Christ died on. This is the same story. Okay? That was a prequel to get to Jesus on the cross. Well, now Jesus on the cross is showing exactly why these testimonies work.
Joe, I'm so thankful for your knowledge, for your time, for your passion, for the dedication. And again, this is the book that we've been talking about tonight. I provided Joe's website and the Amazon link. And again, he published one more book after that we'll be discussing in a couple of months. He's writing third book so far. This is something that you would like to share with your friends, with the UFO community, with Christians and non-Christians, with your pastors, with youth pastors, because there's so many curious people, including myself, that have so many questions, and we always want to appreciate objective, unbiased research data that will help people get healing, get protection, get salvation, because that should be our main goal and purpose.
Sure.
So yes, we'll see you in a couple of months back with Joe. Joe, do you have any final message to the audience before we are done for tonight?
There's some avenues that they can reach out for more information, they can go to my website. It's ce4research.com. And I'm in the process of uploading right now many articles that I've been putting together to be able to help educate people in this, what we're finding here. As I'm getting those loaded up, keep going back. You'll see more articles over time getting loaded up. I'm trying to make things where I don't charge for them. Just so you know, the only reason I put the book out there is because people kept wanting something to put in their hand to share with somebody else. So that's why I put the book together. I've given away more books than I've sold, because the purpose for me was the same one that the Lord gave me right from the beginning. Take this information back to where you came from. That's been my purpose all along. I don't do this as a money-making ministry. Some people say, why not? I say, well, I wasn't called to do that. I was called to take the message back where I came from, and it didn't tell me to go in business doing it. So when I sell these books, I turn around, I buy more at author's cost, which are like $5 a piece, and I give them away. It's a witnessing tool. It's the same as if I wanted to take you and tell you about Jesus Christ. I say, let's go to Starbucks. I'll buy you a $5 cup of coffee and we'll talk about Jesus. I can do the same thing, but I can send you home with a book, So that's kind of how my ministry works. How do I support myself? I've been blessed, absolutely, twice now with my dream job of my entire life. And that's to get to work with rockets. I wouldn't give it up for anything. So I have a great job. It enables me to do this ministry. It enables me to not have to charge everybody for everything. I've got a YouTube channel, CE4 Research YouTube channel. All my podcasts that I've done, all my talks that I've done that I've had videoed and recorded, they're all up there for you to see free on the YouTube. I want you people to be empowered to take the information I'm sharing and use it to help somebody else. Remember, as a Christian, we're to share the gospel message. But how do you win somebody over to the gospel message? How do you win somebody to Jesus Christ? It says, through the word of God and your testimony. This is why the testimonies are so important. In this book, just so you know how it's laid out, the first third of the book is everything you heard us talk about here tonight. The middle section is questions and answers. And some of the leading researchers, Michael Heiser, Gary Bates, some of those leading researchers answered some of those questions. I used their answers because they answered it so much better than I did, and I agreed with their answers. The last part of the book, the biggest part of all, is the evidence. When I first put this book together, I had 100 testimonies in it. When I got to see what it looked like in print, it was like, this thick. And I went, that ain't going to work. So I had to whittle it down, but I still wanted it to be impactful, because it's the testimonies that are the evidence of what I'm sharing with you, that this is not what it seems, that this is a demonic delusion. And there's over 60 testimonies in the back of that book. There's many more on the website, and they're still coming in. So we'll constantly be updating, we'll constantly be improving, but there's a wealth of information for you from all different topics, subject matter on the website. So feel free. If you want to talk to me, if you got a testimony to share, we'd love to have it to help reach people that are lost. You can reach me at my email address at ce4president@yahoo.com. If you just got a question you want to ask me, feel free to write. If you've got a testimony to share, feel free to write. If you are having experiences and you want them to stop, write to me. I'll work with you and I'll help you. I've helped many people.
That's amazing, Joe. Thank you so much for tonight. May God continue to use you, bless you, and make your ministry and work even more fruitful. And I'm honestly looking forward to see you back in probably beginning of February or something like that. So stay in touch, brother. And thank you so much for this. God bless.
Thank you.